The Amu Darya, also called the Amu River and historically known by its Latin name Oxus, is a major river in Central Asia. It is formed by the junction of the Vakhsh and Panj rivers at Panjeh in Afghanistan, and flows from the north-westwards into what remains of the Aral Sea. In ancient times, the river was regarded as the boundary between Greater Iran and Turan. Names. In classical antiquity, the river was known as the Oxus in Latin and Shiomicron Sigma Oxos in Greek, a clear derivative of Vakhsh, the name of the largest tributary of the river. In Vedic Sanskrit, the river is also referred to as Vaksu. The Avestan texts too refer to the river as Yaksha, Vaksha referring to the Jaksatis, Darya twin river to Amu Darya. In Middle Persian sources of the Sassanid period, the river is known as Werod. The name Amu is said to have come from the medieval city of Amul, in modern Turkmenistan, with Darya being the Persian word for river. Medieval Arabic and Muslim sources call the river Jehun, which is derived from Gihon, the biblical name for one of the 4 rivers of the Garden of Eden, as the river Gozan. Western travelers in the 19th century mentioned that one of the names by which the river was known in Afghanistan was Gozan, and that this name was used by Greek, Mongol, Chinese, Persian, Jewish, and Afghan historians. However, this name is no longer used. Hara and the river of Gozan. The Gozan River is the river Bork, i.e., the Oxus or the Amu Darya. And were brought into Hala and Haber and Hara and to the river Gozan. Description. The river's total length is 2,400 kilometers and its drainage basin totals 534,739 square kilometers in area, providing a mean discharge of around 97.4 cubic kilometers of water per year. The river is navigable for over 1,450 kilometers. All of the water comes from the high mountains in the south, where annual precipitation can be over 1,000 millimeters. Even before large-scale irrigation began, high summer evaporation meant that not all of this discharge reached the Aral Sea, though there is some evidence the large Pamir glaciers provided enough meltwater for the Aral to overflow during the 13th and 14th centuries. Since the end of the 19th century, there have been 4 different claimants as the true source of the Oxus. 1. The Pamir River, which emerges from Lake Zorkul in the Pamir Mountains, and flows west to Kila-i Panya, where it joins the Wakhan River to form the Panj River. 2. The Sarhad, a Little Pamir River flowing down the Little Pamir in the High Wakhan. 3. Lake Chamaktin, which discharges to the east into the Aksu River, which in turn becomes the Murghab and then Batang rivers, and which eventually joins the Panj-Oxus branch 350 kilometers downstream at Roshan Voma in Tajikistan. 4. An ice cave at the end of the Wakja Valley, in the Wakhan Corridor, in the Pamir Mountains, near the border with Pakistan. A glacier turns into the Wakhan River and joins the Pamir River about 50 kilometers downstream. Bill Colgrave's expedition to Wakhan in 2007 found that both claimants 2 and 3 had the same source, the Chelab stream, which bifurcates on the watershed of the Little Pamir, half flowing into Lake Chamaktin and half into the parent stream of the Little Pamir, Sarhad River. Therefore, the Chelab stream may be properly considered the true source, a parent stream of the Oxus. The Panj River forms the border of Afghanistan and Tajikistan. It flows west to Ishkashim, where it turns north and then northwest through the Pamirs, passing the Tajikistan-Afghanistan Friendship Bridge. It subsequently currently forms the border of Afghanistan and Uzbekistan for about 200 kilometers, passing Terms and the Afghanistan-Uzbekistan Friendship Bridge. It delineates the border of Afghanistan and Turkmenistan for another 100 kilometers before it flows into Turkmenistan at Amu River. As the Amu Darya, it flows across Turkmenistan south to north, passing Turkmenabat, and forms the border of Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan from Horkabat. It is then split by the two Umayan hydro complex into many waterways that used to form the river delta joining the Aral Sea, passing Urgench, Dasiguz, and other cities, but it does not reach what is left of the sea anymore and is lost in the desert. Use of water from the Amu Darya for irrigation has been a major contributing factor to the shrinking of the Aral Sea since the late 1950s. Historical records state that in different periods, the river flowed into the Aral Sea, into the Caspian Sea, or both, similar to the Sea Darya watershed. About 1,385,045 square kilometers of land is drained by the Amu Darya into the Aral Sea and Aral Basin. This includes most of Tajikistan, the southwest corner of Kyrgyzstan, the northeast corner of Afghanistan, a long narrow portion of eastern Turkmenistan and about half of Uzbekistan. Part of the Amu Darya's drainage divide in Tajikistan forms that country's border with China and Pakistan. About 61% of the drainage lies within Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, while 39% is in Afghanistan. Of the area drained by the Amu Darya, only about 200,000 square kilometers actively contribute water to the river. This is because many of the river's major tributaries have been diverted, and much of the river's drainage is dominated by outlying desert and steppe. The abundant water flowing in the Amu Darya comes almost entirely from glaciers in the Pamir Mountains and Tian Shan, which, standing above the surrounding arid plain, collect atmospheric moisture which otherwise would probably escape somewhere else. Without its mountain water sources, the Amu Darya would not contain any water, would not exist because it rarely rains in the lowlands through which most of the river flows. Throughout most of the steppe, the annual rainfall is about 300 millimeters. History. The ancient Greeks called the Amu Darya the Oxus. In ancient times, the river was regarded as the boundary between Greater Iran and Turan. The river's drainage lies in the area between the former empires of Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great, although they occurred at very different times. When the Mongols came to the area, they used the water of the Amu Darya to flood Panjeh Urgench. One southern route of the Silk Road ran along part of the Amu Darya northwestward from Terms before going westwards to the Caspian Sea. It is believed that the Amu Darya's course across the Karakum Desert has gone through several major shifts in the past few thousand years. Much of the time, most recently from the 13th century to the late 16th century, the Amu Darya emptied into both the Aral and the Caspian Seas, reaching the latter via a large distributary called the Uzboy River. The Uzboy splits off from the main channel just south of the Amu Darya Delta. Sometimes the flow through the two branches was more or less equal, but often most of the Amu Darya's flow split to the west and flowed into the Caspian. People began to settle along the lower Amu Darya and the Uzboy in the 5th century, establishing a thriving chain of agricultural lands, towns, and cities. In about 985 AD, the massive Gurganj Dam at the bifurcation of the forks started to divert water to the Aral. Genghis Khan's troops destroyed the dam in 1221, and the Amu Darya shifted to distributing its flow more or less equally between the main stem and the Uzboy. But in the 18th century, the river again turned north, flowing into the Aral Sea, a path it has taken since. Less and less water water flowed down the Uzboy until, in the 1720s, the river's surface flow completely dried up. The first Englishman to reach the Oxus, William Moorcroft, visited about 1824. Another to reach the region in the Great Game period, a naval officer called John Wood, came with an expedition to find the source of the river in 1839. He found modern-day Lake Zorkel, called it Lake Victoria, and proclaimed he had found the source. Then, the French explorer and geographer Thibaut Vinet collected a lot of information about this area during 5 expeditions between 1856 and 1862. The question of finding a route between the Oxus Valley and India has been of concern historically. A direct route crosses extremely high mountain passes in the Hindu Kush and isolated areas like Kafiristan. Some in Britain feared that the Empire of Russia, which at the time wielded great influence over the Oxus area, would overcome these obstacles and find a suitable route through which to invade British India, but this never came to pass. The Soviet Union became the ruling power in the early 1920s and expelled Muhammad Alam Khan. It later put down the Basmachi movement and killed Ibrahim Bek. A large refugee population of Central Asians, including Turkmen, Tajiks and Uzbeks, fled to northern Afghanistan. In the 1960s and 1970s, the Soviets started using the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya to irrigate extensive cotton fields in the Central Asian plain. Before this time, water from the rivers was already being used for agriculture, but not on this massive scale. The Karakum Canal, Kashi Canal, and Bukhara Canal were among the larger of the irrigation diversions built. The 1970s. In the course of the Soviet war in Afghanistan, Soviet forces used the valley to invade Afghanistan through terms. The Soviet Union fell in the 1990s and Central Asia split up into the many smaller countries that lie within or partially within the Amu Darya basin. The main Turkmen Canal, a proposed project that would have diverted water along the dry Uzboy riverbed into central Turkmenistan, was never built. During the Soviet era, a resource-sharing system was instated in which Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan shared water originating from the Amu Darya and Sir Darya rivers with Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan in summer. In return, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan received Kazakh, Turkmen, and Uzbek coal, gas, and electricity in winter. After the fall of the Soviet Union, this system disintegrated and the Central Asian nations have failed to reinstate it. Inadequate infrastructure, poor water management, and outdated irrigation methods all exacerbate the issue. Siberian tiger repopulation project. The Amu Darya's delta was suggested as a potential site. A feasibility study was initiated to investigate if the area is suitable and if such an initiative would receive support from relevant decision makers. A viable tiger population of about 100 animals would require at least 5,000 square kilometers of large tracts of contiguous habitat with rich prey populations. Such habitat is not available at this stage and cannot be provided in the short term. The proposed region is therefore unsuitable for the reintroduction, at least at this stage.